Good morning and welcome to Breaking Bread in Brookland. By that I mean having coffee in Brookland. I want to introduce you to someone who is a dear friend, someone I really respect and admire, an incredible just change agent in this community, Andy Shallal from Busboys and Poets. Andy,
cheers.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We've substituted, by the way, our DC mugs for the Busboys and Poets mugs. I'm wearing my Busboys t-shirt. Andy, yeah.
Farm to table, the works.
Yeah, we're doing it all here. But Andy, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So, one of the things I want to do is really get the folks in this community. Everyone knows Busboys, and many people know you. I want to go back a bit before Busboys. Who are you? Where'd you come from? How long have you been here? You know, what makes you tick?
I grew up in this city. I went to school at Catholic University in Brookland.
Oh, beautiful.
My undergraduate studies there. And my family lived in Arlington for a while there, and then we moved into Fairfax County for a while. Then moved back to the city, then moved out of the city, then back in the city again. Yeah, I've been attached to DC for, over 50 years now.
And your family moved here?
Yes, we moved here from Iraq. My father was representing the Arab League at that time, and he was stationed here in Washington, D.C. And he, after his term ended, he decided he likes it too much here, so decided to stay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, I should mention this whole title, Breaking Bread in Brookland, actually the genesis is actually from something that Andy and I did together a few years ago that we called Breaking Bread with Ballou, which was Ballou High School. And Andy was generous enough to participate in us having a dinner for Ballou juniors and individual dinners with mentors in the restaurant. And we had 2 turns of the restaurants.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Packed, and it was just a wonderful experience.
Amazing.
So I didn't want to lose that kind of alliteration in doing something like this.
And we were in the process of planning one for Anacostia High School, right?
We were.
Right before COVID-19 hit, we were going to do that, and we were close, but not quite. We'll have to pick up where we left off.
We will. We will do it again, but it was unfortunate that COVID-19 hit right when we were about to do this. So, okay, so you have a very interesting background. You've grown up in this community. Where did the whole concept, not just of Busboys, but before that, I think your first restaurant was Luna Cafe?
Yes, it was Skewers, actually.
Skewers, okay.
Yeah,
and why did you get involved in the restaurant business?
Well, my father had a small restaurant when we were growing up. So after he left government, he got a restaurant, a small little tiny strip mall place that sold pizzas and subs and things like that. And it was kind of the neighborhood place, and there weren't many options back then. We're talking about late 60s, early 70s. And we were small kids. We would go there and hang out. Sometimes we were like forced to wash dishes and clean up and do whatever, indentured servants do. and so that's what we were kind of involved in. And so I loved it. I thought it was really a lot of fun. Like, I really enjoyed the cleaning. I enjoyed the service. I enjoyed the watching the customers, have a good time. I enjoyed all that. So it was kind of fun. I mean, I always saw it as being a fun business. My father, on the other hand, really didn't like it very much. He didn't see it that much fun. It was just a practical thing for him to do and raise enough money to support his family. And that was really his main intent. It wasn't about, I love the restaurant business. He just fell into it.
And then, so it's interesting that you just found it as fun, but what we have seen, I remember going to Luna Cafe because I've been here that long, over 20 years. But Busboys is much more than a restaurant. You've created an environment and a culture that it is almost like a community center, and really is heavy into inclusivity and social justice. Where did that come from?
Well, I mean, always thought that, becoming an American citizen, I'm a naturalized citizen. You end up really giving up a lot of who you are, your identity, and at some point you want to question: are you going to a different space that's better? And so the United States and America, I think, once we decide to stay here, has so much potential and so many opportunities for people. And I always thought that, there are very important values this country stands for. And of course, I come from the Middle East, where we see those values don't really translate well. We look at America as being the bully of the world. We don't see it as being this magnanimous space that people, aspire to come to. And so I thought part of my responsibility as a new citizen is to really kind of hold it to those kinds of standards. And it was just for me to feel good about being an American. Because I don't want to be the bully American. I want to be the good American, the American that upholds those important values that I think we all really love. And that's why we call ourselves Americans. And so that was kind of, I think, the impetus behind it. And I thought that so much of the world knows so much about us, and we know so little about everyone else. And how is it possible that we can actually expand our knowledge about other people? Because the minute you start noticing other people, the minute you start learning about other cultures, you start reflecting differently on yourself. And that's really what I was hoping for, that I could find a space where people can come and break bread, where in that process they also break barriers, and then be able to build on that. And of course, you got this captive audience now. It's like, what do you do with them? So you give them knowledge, you give them a bookstore, you give them a stage, you give them conversations, you give them authors, you give them, opportunities to dig deeper into many issues that oftentimes people don't get an opportunity to dig into. You let them sit with people that are different than them. You let them, interact with others, and so on. That is bound to create incredible opportunities for personal change and societal change.
And your original busboys was on 14th Street?
Yes.
And how many do you have now?
We have 7.
7 throughout the DMV.
Yes.
And here, I think you've had thoughts of to expanding this maybe to other cities throughout the country.
Yeah.
And that's still a thought.
Well, the thoughts are there.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have to retrench, regroup, reassess, figure out where do we go next. With this pandemic situation, of course, it turned everything upside down.
And speaking of the pandemic, just from a purely a business standpoint, how, as a restaurant owner, how has that impacted Busboys and Poets?
Well, we've never had this kind of experience before. There's been moments where we've had to close down because of a power outage or something else happening that's out of our control, but never like this and never to this extent. It's been very challenging, of course, but people don't go into business not to be challenged. I mean, they go into business at least at some level knowing it's going to be a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles that come your way. And if you don't know that, then
ride.
Yeah, you're not going to survive.
Yeah.
No question about it. But there are people like me and others who thrive on this kind of constant uncertainty. I mean, really, I love the uncertainty. I love the excitement. I love the ability to pivot. I love the ability to rethink. It forces you into spaces that you never imagined going into. It forces you to question your values, question the way you do business, question so many things. So it's, in many ways, it's really exciting. I mean, This is the most exciting time to be in business. At the same time, it's the most challenging. So you have a lot of people that have come into business, entrepreneurs who just opened places, retail shops and others, who have never seen a downturn, because we haven't had a downturn for a while now, right? It's been 10, 12 years. For many of us who've been in this business much longer, we've seen the ups and downs. We know that there's going to be a blip coming along somewhere. And we tend to plan a little bit for that. This has been a fairly deceptive stretch, frankly, because people thinking like, wow, this may not be a blip. Who knows? And maybe just leveling off a little bit and then back to the races again.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways, being prepared for the downturns, having been in business as long as someone like me has, makes it a little bit more manageable during these very difficult times. And of course, you go into this and you got this huge pandemic, and then you end up with protests and curfews. So just as you're trying to breathe a little bit, we're going to phase one.
That's odd. See a DC police motorcycle followed by a cop car? It's almost like they're escorting somebody. I don't know.
Yeah. We've gotten used to it now, right? Yeah.
Well, so COVID-19 aside, thinking about when you had, Luna Cafe back in DuPont Circle, the restaurant scene has changed drastically in this community. We've
Yeah.
become a foodie town, which we
Yes.
weren't before.
Yeah.
The competition has become fierce.
Yes.
Has there been any type of, how do you keep ahead of that? Being there's so many other restaurants, so many other choices now for people to go to.
Well, eating out is more than just eating. It's also an experience. It's also connecting with the community. It's connecting with neighbors and friends and things like that. So we have been, I think, at the forefront, I'd like to think, of creating spaces that allow people to intersect with their neighbors, with people different than them, with people like them, with an opportunity to not only excite your body, but also excite your mind and your soul, So those are important elements, I think, that come into play. I think being able to always listening to your customers, listening to what people want, listening to what's coming your way in the form of change, and whether it's food or whether it's societal change, and kind of pivoting and constantly being in that state of constant flux, I think is really important for business to survive the competition. Competition isn't about doing something better than your neighbor. Sometimes I think when we think of competition, we think of, some guy opens a burger joint, and then you open a burger joint and add cheese to it, and then somebody else adds mushrooms to it, so you end up just kind of almost cannibalizing one another, you end up destroying the other guy in order for you to survive. And I like to think of competition as being, finding something that's more complementary to the place next door. So somebody opens a burger place, you open a veggie burger place, or you open something completely different, and kind of maybe a potato chips factory next to the burger place. So the people get the burger from one side, the chips on the other side, and so on.
Yeah.
So that's a very simple example, but it is, I think competition has to be understanding how do you complement one another in an environment that's oftentimes seems saturated with businesses. It's not just about doing it better, it's about doing it differently, adding to it as opposed to just trying to destroy what somebody else has created.
So with Busboys, one of the things I've just loved about it is it's just been this activism, this social justice bent to what you do. It's very much beyond just being a restaurant. It's right at your bookstore. I was walking past the Brookland Busboys and saw the woman that was painting this beautiful mural in response to the coronavirus. I know you've done that with other storefront windows. You've talked about trainings that you've given to your staff members on the topics of what does inclusivity mean. Tell us more about that.
Well, having come from a foreign country to this country and being of a little darker, especially during the summer, I got pretty dark. I had a short afro, and I think I was oftentimes thought of as being black. And so I experienced that kind of racism in a very light way, frankly, but I was called the N-word growing up here in this country, and I recognized the significance of race in this country's structures, no matter what the structures are, whether you're in school, whether you're walking home from school, whether who you hang out with, who you play with, who you marry, where you live, all of those things have race attached to them at some level in this country. And I wanted to fit in, and it was impossible for me to fit in. You know, the white kids, you know, didn't see me as part of their tribe, and the black kids didn't really see me as part of their tribe. And so you're in this other space, and not many kids want to be the other, you know, and at least not then. You know, now it's kind of cool to be the other, right? You know, but back then it wasn't, and it was really difficult to try to fit into that space. And I wanted to create a place, such as Busboys and Poets, where I felt like someone like me, or anyone like you, or anybody else can fit in and feel comfortable. And that was kind of the mission. And so we started with the idea of creating the space and then making sure that we do enough training for our staff to understand the mission behind what we do, and really kind of not only understand it, but also live it in a way. So we created what we call a tribal statement that talks about uplifting, and we also created these trainings that we do with our staff. Every new group of hires, cohorts, I personally sit down with them, you know, as much as possible, pretty much all the time, to be able to have this conversation on race with them. And you're always, I'm not, but I think a lot of people are surprised by how much there is a hunger for that conversation. Even young people, you know, many of them who feel like they don't see race, they're beyond it and so on, long for the opportunity to have this conversation, particularly with people different than they are, you know. Excuse me. So I think providing a platform for young people to have these conversations in a safe environment is very welcomed, and I get a lot of responses to that. In fact, it's when we do our exit interviews, they always refer to that time as one of their best moments working at Busboys and Poets, the opportunity to be able to talk about race with the owner of the space, which is pretty unusual.
Yeah,
I mean, many
yeah.
people, you know, they usually get put through an HR, you know, some sort of check the box kind of thing, and it feels very, very disattached from reality. And I think with ours, it's very much personal. People get to speak their truth. People get to express their opinions to others, share their thoughts with others, and it's always quite transformative, I think, for people that go through that.
So it leads to the question, I think, that we're all thinking about: who would have thought that the coronavirus would take a backseat to another crisis?
Right.
But that's exactly what happened.
Excuse me.
With the murder of George Floyd,
Yeah.
it has sparked protests throughout the community, throughout the country, literally throughout the world.
Yep.
And this is not something that happened one night and we went back to normal. We are, I think, in day 9 of the protests and the marches that have been happening across the country. What are your thoughts on it? Where do we go from here?
I'd like to think that these protests have been going on for over 400 years. This is just another flare-up. You know, we see them, and oftentimes we're surprised. Some people are surprised by the fact that what's the fuss, you know, and they quickly patch things up in the moment. You know, you fire the bad cop, and then you move on. I think this feels a little different. This one, I think, people have been talking about intersectionality, been talking about systemic things, been talking about so many other things, and I think they're not going to settle just for indicting these 4 policemen that were involved in the killing of George Floyd. I think people are demanding more. And I have to say, we have Donald Trump to thank, because he has taken racism to a whole new level. In the past, racism has been very tacit, very quietly, you know, pervade. And I think with him, he's so out there that it has created a sense of urgency in responding to it. And I think, you know, I tweeted this morning, I said, you know, who knew that he would be the one we've been waiting for, right? I mean, the fact that he is able to mobilize the entire globe. We're talking like New Zealand, a country of 5 million people. It has like demonstrations all over the place. We're in the opposite end of the globe. We're talking about people in Palestine out in the street. We're talking about people in Iraq out in the street. I saw an Iraqi big, huge sign, George Floyd,
Oh my gosh.
written in Arabic. You know, I mean, you're talking about a complete sea change in that connection people see of injustice that isn't just an American thing, but all over the world. So it's been remarkable. I mean, the fact that we have iPhones and videos and YouTube and all that, you can send out this information all over the world in such a fast way, has become a really amazing, cool thing. This morning, I woke up and there was a group of about 10 kids. They couldn't have been more than teenagers, maybe early 20s or something, and they're banging with pots and pans at 6:30 in the morning, saying no justice, no peace, and say her name, say his name, and just, you know, yelling. And these are white kids, probably from upper class neighborhoods, who are like getting involved and finally finding a purpose, you know. For too long, we've dismissed young people as being self-absorbed, you know, into their iPads, into their iPhones, into their whatever, their world. But, I mean, who knew they've been fortifying?
And you know, I've been down to the protests a couple times now. I know you have as well. And it is a rainbow of
Remarkable.
demographic there now.
I was here in 1968 when the riots happened, and I remember as a kid watching them on TV and seeing black people. I mean, black people were angry and they were in the street and they were like looting and burning and protesting and yelling and screaming, and it was just black people. And now you see almost sort of similar images, but it's a very huge rainbow of people. In fact, in some instances, mostly white kids that are out there. So I think that gives me the hope. The fact that white kids are out there is going to make the huge difference. It's not just about being black, it's about justice. It's about injustice. And people recognize it no matter what color you are, you know, and people are starting to do that.
And you know, I think it's interesting. I was hearing someone speak about this, saying that, you know, because of the structural racism that existed in this country for decades now, well, beyond decades really, if you were to have just African Americans in the street, because of those structures that are in place, they could potentially try to avoid making any change.
Absolutely.
And now, because there's a diversity there, and because of the privilege that often happens with the white community, they can't ignore it.
Well, when under the Obama administration during those years, when we had the Black Lives Matter movement, it was mostly black people that were on the street, right? Talking about Black Lives Matter. There was a lot of others who supported that, but they weren't out in the street with the black folks. And I think it was easily dismissed. And I think there was a big counter reaction to it, because a lot of the white middle class suburbanites were looking at that, getting scared, thinking, oh my God, you know, this is the uprising of black people. And we screwed them up so badly, you know, I hope they don't coming for revenge, you know. So I think people are very lucky that black people are asking for justice and not revenge. You know, there's a very different thing.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think the backlash came where Trump was elected. This case, you know, these same suburbanites, kids, are the ones that are on the street, and they're going to come back and talk to their parents. So it'd be hard to just ignore it and say this is just a group of folks who are just angry at the system. This is everybody. Even people that are benefiting from the system are recognizing that the system is broken.
Exactly.
You know, that
Yeah.
it needs fixing if we are to continue to be the United States of America.
Exactly. So you have a restaurant here in Brooklyn, among other parts of the community.
Back to Brookland.
Back to Brookland, but you live, I believe, in Adams Morgan.
I live in Adams Morgan.
Okay.
Yes.
And what's your favorite community right now? Maybe besides Adams Morgan, which one? Do you
Well,
like?
I mean, I have to say I've been spending a fair amount of time in Anacostia. I always feel that Anacostia has so much love in it. You know, I mean, I never feel as much an appreciation and love than what I do when I'm in Anacostia. You know, I just have to set foot in my restaurant there, and I tell you, I'm not exaggerating, but I get at least every other person comes up to me and says thank you.
That's so great.
It is incredibly heartwarming. I love Anacostia. I really do. I mean, I'm not just saying that as a slogan. You know, when I ran for office here, I spent my whole time east of the river because I really want. I mean, for us to grow as a city, we have to go to the areas that have been left out and figure out what can we do to improve those areas. It's not just about the other areas will take care of themselves. They're doing fine. It's those areas that need that additional support, that need that attention, that are going to really be the ones that bring the entire city up. And I think that's why I wanted to spend more time there and wanted to commit to working with Southeast.
Well, I just think it's such a beautiful thing that as a restaurateur that you had the courage and the vision to open up a restaurant in Anacostia. I'm sure you get a lot of restaurateurs that wouldn't even think of doing that. And I think of it like to some parallels, like when Whole Foods decided to open their grocery store on P Street, and then you saw the change. Like I'm hoping that with Busboys, it's going to bring more restaurants and more into the economy there.
So here's the challenge, Jeff. I think the challenge you have is when Whole Foods came, that whole area became super gentrified, right? And now it's untouchable. I mean, apartments are very expensive. You know, it's predominantly, I would say, probably 90% white at the very least, and a lot of people have been pushed out. So how do you create that opportunity and have places like a Whole Foods and have places like a Busboys and Poets without forcing people out? That requires government. That is not something that a business can do.
Yeah.
I mean, Whole Foods just shows up.
Yeah.
You know, what can Whole Foods do that can prevent the change? Well, not much. I mean, they're busy doing their business. You know, so when Busboys and Poets opened there, yes, we are involved with the community. We do a lot of community events. We do a lot of programs. But all those are just Band-Aids, really. They're not like systemic, you know. I want to be clear here. Systemic change has to come from government. You know, it's the system, right? That's the word, systemic. And the system begins with government policies that create the openings, the paths for people to get out from conditions and positions that they're in due to historic, injustice that's happening. You know, I wrote a letter that was printed in the Informer on the case for reparations for Ward 7, Ward 8, and other wards like Ward 5 who have been left out from the economic boom that the city has seen. We need to really talk about reparations. We can't just talk about handouts. What happens right now is, it's almost like hush money is given to certain organizations to sort of maintain some kind of, some kind of balance to keep people from getting too hungry, too poor, too this, too that, but never bring them out of that space that they're in, because it's a way to just kind of contain revolt, really.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy in the long run. That makes us all, pretty soon we'll look like the Hunger Games, I think at some point you've got to be able to say, you know what, we all do better when we all do better. And it's not just about the rising tide lifts all boats. No, rising tide lifts the big boats much higher. So you end up with the same inequality. It
Yeah.
doesn't help.
Yeah.
A rising tide endangers actually the smaller boats. They sink. So that metaphor needs to get out of our vocabulary. We need to really create a whole different structure. Build up the smaller boats to make sure that they are big enough to withstand the currents. And right now, that's not what we're doing.
You mentioned that you ran for mayor at a
I did
time.
indeed.
You're talking about a lot of systemic things that you say it's DC government that need to step up
Yes.
to address these issues.
Yes.
A two-part question. Have you thought about making a second run when it comes to DC politics? And if not, what do you see your role and or Busboy and Poet's role in the next 5 years in trying to create systemic change in this community?
Well, I've thought about it. I still think about it. I loved running for office. I enjoyed it. It's a very different atmosphere now. Running is like, ugh. It's such a personal sacrifice at so many levels. So it's something that we have to think very hard and strong about in order for me to do it. So having said that, the idea of a role that anyone can play really is to not sit on the sidelines and wait for things to happen, to actually be part of that change. We are working, for instance, in my business to change the structure of how we do business. I mean, this is a moment. This pandemic has given us an opportunity to rethink how we do things with a new lens. And that's really pretty cool because how often do you get a chance to okay, start over? It's like, it doesn't happen, right? And nobody predicted this. Nobody knew this was going to happen, I think. And we can't just squander it. I feel like this is such a gift that's been given to us by whoever. And this gift is almost like tapping us on the shoulder and says, pay attention. And for us to be able to just ignore it and go back to business as usual, somebody's gonna laugh at us. Say, really? We gave you this and you just walked away and decided to go back to normal? Wow, get a grip.
So obviously the premise of this whole thing, this breaking bread in Brookland, is to meet change agents. There's so many amazing people like yourself that reside in this community where they call this home and are doing their level best to try to make this a better place for all. If you could decide who our next guest would be, who would that be?
Well, I want to say that I'm not amazing. I'm just another person that lives in this community. Your next guest, I mean, it depends. I mean, if you're looking for people that can have an impact, obviously, maybe someone like Kenyon McDuffie, who's the council member for this community. I think he's a bright star. He's someone I think that would be an important change agent. He is a change agent. He has the power to make an impact. So he's someone that I would definitely would consider talking to.
Kenyon, you're on notice. I'll be reaching out to you soon. This is how I got Andy.
He's great. I mean, he's in the community. He's accessible.
Yeah.
I think he has his heart in the right place. He's been doing lots of conversations on race. He tapped me to get involved in those conversations. So he's someone I think that at this time, especially given what's happening around us, I think he would be a great guest.
I agree.
Yeah.
So I asked this last question to Tim Kine when I had him on, and I want to ask the same to you, which is, for 30 seconds, you get to stand in front of a podium and speak to the entire world. All the homes, TVs, internet, streaming, all that stuff. You get 30 seconds to speak your truth. What is that?
Well, I mean, my truth would be something that's in the moment, what's happening today, right here. You know, the fact that, you know, I've lived here in the United States for over 50 years, have always wondered why there has not been more of an uprising to take place to make the systemic changes that this country really deserves. And to see this moment in my lifetime is really quite exciting. And I just want to make sure that people don't just go back to business as usual. This is an opportunity that has been handed to us on a silver platter, and we have to make sure that we don't squander it. This is a once in a lifetime incredible change. And I'm talking about systemic change. I'm talking about economic change. I'm talking about social change. I'm talking about change all across the board. And I think the United States sits at a very, very important platform, an important pedestal in many instances that actually can have an impact on the rest of the globe. You know, and how we conduct ourselves and how we militarized ourselves and how we can demilitarize ourselves, how we can change the way we police, how we can change the way we interact with one another as human beings, you know, on many levels. I think it's this is the moment. I hope we don't let it go.
Andy, thank you. I am happy that you are on this earth, and I'm honored to be friends with you. And I thank you for all you've done for our community, and I just your openness. Andy got involved, and I met Andy. He got involved with City Year, was a supporter, and then we've been able to partner on these projects that I've mentioned to you. And whenever I've asked him to get involved in something, he's always all in. And so I really appreciate that. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
That's another episode of Breaking Bread in Brookland with Andy Shallal from Busboys and Poets. We will wait to hear back from you all. Kenya McDuffie is a great idea of a next guest, but if you all have any thoughts on who you think should be a next guest, please share them with me. I'm going to keep on doing this until someone tells me to stop doing it. So I just think this is an important time. My tiny little piece to try to give back is to meet these amazing people that are part of our community, that are restaurant owners, to people that are just, you know, trying to get by and make their lives better and just try to impact this community, Washington, D.C., that is so important to many of us. So I hope you all have a great rest of the week and weekend, and I look forward to seeing you again on Breaking Bread with